On the third day after my car accident and subsequent amnesia, I received a strange phone call. The voice on the other end was cold and distant. "We're already divorced. Stop playing these petty tricks. It's embarrassing." Then, a childish voice followed, full of disdain. "I hate you. I want Annie Exine to be my mom instead." I felt utterly baffled. "Congratulations, then. I hope your dad remarries soon." Later that night, the butler called me, sounding somewhat helpless. He said the young master was crying and demanding to see his mom. But the person who answered the phone was Dr. Xie, who said, "She's asleep." The next moment, someone else took over the call, their voice filled with barely suppressed anger. "Thank you for looking after her during this time. I'm coming to take her home right now." Xie Shubai held my hand tightly, kissed the tears from my lashes, and chuckled softly. "No need. She cried a lot earlier, and it took me quite a while to calm her down." When I opened my eyes, all I could see was a blinding white. My head felt like it had been pierced by a drill, the pain sharp and unbearable. I lifted my head slightly, noticing the cold drip of medication from an forebag. No wonder I felt so chilly. "You're awake? Is there anywhere you still feel uncomfortable?" A deep, calm voice sounded beside me, eerily familiar. I rolled my eyes to look in the direction of the clinical doctor's hand and followed the line of sight up to see a refined and cold face. I was momentarily stunned, then exclaimed, "Senior brother? Didn't you already leave on a flight?" "Xieshubai, my direct senior brother da." In my muddled memory, I vaguely recall seeing him off at the airport not too long ago. But then, what happened after that? The pain in my head intensified, but I just couldn't remember what happened next. Why am I in the hospital? Feeling guilty, I glanced at Xieshubai. "Did something happen to me on the way back, causing you to miss your flight?" Hearing my words, Xieshubai, who was in the middle of writing a medical record while wearing his white coat, paused. He leaned in closer, his brows slightly furrowed. The clean scent of his detergent filled my senses, making my cheeks flushed. After a moment of observation, Xieshubai turned to a nearby nurse and said, "Please call Dr. Hu from the psychiatric department. It seems the patient has suffered a brain injury and might have developed selective amnesia." After a brief examination, I learned that Xie Shubai had graduated with his PhD and returned home 2 years ago. I had lost 6 years of memories due to the accident. Xie Shubai and Doctor Hu discussed my condition outside the door, while I clutched the corner of my blanket, staring dazedly at the profile of Xie Shubai's face that seemed to glow. The current Xie Shubai indeed seemed more mature and enticing than the one in my memories. Suddenly, a nurse came in holding a phone. "Miss Chiao, there's a call for you." I took the phone. There was only a string of numbers on the screen. No name. I slid my finger to answer, and a cold voice came from the other end. "We're already divorced. Stop playing these petty tricks. It's embarrassing. Stop causing trouble. I'm busy with Xian in Paris for a project and have no time to deal with you." Then, that childish voice piped up again, full of disdain. "Imph. I hate you. I want Aunt Exine to be my mom." What? I was utterly baffled by this conversation. Who were this father and son? This was all nonsense. Confused, I responded, "Congratulations, then. I hope your dad remarries soon." The person on the other end seemed taken aback by my response, their voice rising in disbelief. "You?" At that moment, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that Xie Shubai had finished speaking with Doctor Hu and was walking toward the ward. My breath caught, and I couldn't be bothered with the person on the phone anymore. I immediately and decisively hung up. I looked at Xie Shubai's handsome face and flashed a smile, asking the question that had been on my mind the most. "Senior brother, are you single right now?" 6 years ago, I had a crush on Xie Shubai, but it seemed our fates were not aligned. Now, 6 years later, with such a great opportunity before me, I wasn't about to let it slip away again. Oh dear, the young master of the Song family is truly heartless. Even though he's been married for several years, as soon as his first love returned to the country, he immediately kicked out his wife and rushed to get a divorce. The nurses were gathered together, gossiping in hushed tones. They glanced in the direction of my ward, shaking their heads in pity. This woman is quite pitiful too. She knew Song Xiaoye, young master Song, had someone else in his heart, but she still stayed with him for years, enduring all sorts of mistreatment from the Song family. Not only did Song Xiaoye despise her, but even her own son turned against her, constantly telling her to leave. This car accident, they say it was an accident, but who knows if she wasn't driven to despair? A young nurse munching on sunflower seeds added with a smile. The Song family is rich and powerful, even if she wasn't loved. So what? After the divorce, she must have gotten enough assets to live in luxury for the rest of her life. If it were me, I'd be more than happy. My four-drip was almost empty, and after waiting in the ward for a while without seeing any nurse come to change it, I decided to push the four-stand down the hallway. As I rounded the corner, I overheard the nurses in the middle of their gossip. I love hearing gossip, so I stood against the wall, completely engrossed, and sighed along with them. Who was this Song family's young master? What a jerk. And that son of his was just as heartless. Hearing the young nurse's teasing remarks, I couldn't help but nod in agreement. Yes, yes, after the divorce, she got a huge amount of property. Consider it as compensation for serving two idiots as an employer. The ex-Mrs. Song should definitely not do anything foolish. As I was completely absorbed in their conversation, feeling as if I were part of it, a deep, cold voice suddenly sounded behind me. Xiao Yin. I didn't know how long Xie Shubai had been standing behind me, but he looked down at me with those pale eyes, his tone slow and almost mocking. Instead of resting in your room, you're out here eavesdropping on gossip? Get up and go back. Seeing it was Xie Shubai, I was so embarrassed I wished I could find a hole to crawl into. I meekly lowered my head as he lectured me, then awkwardly got up and shuffled back to the ward. Looking back every few steps, Xie Shubai shot me a cool glance before turning towards the nurse's station. I don't know what he said, but the nurses scattered like frightened birds. A moment later, the young nurse reluctantly entered with a medicine cart to change my four. She looked troubled, probably because of a scolding from Xie Shubai. I felt guilty too, quickly glancing at the name tag on her chest before clearing my throat and softly asking, "Nurse Xiaozhang, can I ask you something?" I hesitated, then continued, "Is Dr. Xie single?" At my question, Nurse Xiaozhang's eyes lit up instantly. She bit her lip, clearly torn about how to respond. Finally, she sighed and said, "Miss Chiao, you seem to have a good relationship with Dr. Xie. Why not ask him directly?" I let out a long sigh. Thanks for the suggestion, but I've already asked. When I asked him, Xie Shubai had calmly signed the records and said plainly, "Xiao Yin, you're my patient." He refused to answer. Xie Shubai said I was lucky. Despite such a serious car accident, I hadn't sustained any major injuries. He insisted I stay in bed for a few more days, and I was growing restless. I looked at him eagerly. "Senior brother, when can I leave the hospital?" Over the past few days, every nurse who came to change my medicine had kept tight-lipped about Xie Shubai's relationship status, afraid of getting in trouble later. Judging from Xie Shubai's behavior, I had my suspicions, but without confirmation, it was driving me crazy. In the hospital, I was his patient, so I had to keep my distance. But once I was discharged, I would have a chance to dig deeper. Xie Shubai flipped through my medical report without looking up. "Xiao Yin, as your attending physician, I must tell you that adequate rest is crucial for your recovery. Your body needs time to heal from the trauma and—" Before he could finish his sentence, a timid voice interrupted from the doorway, "Daddy?" It was a little girl, about 5 or 6 years old, standing at the entrance of the room with wide, curious eyes focused on Xie Shubai. She had her hair in pigtails, and her features bore a striking resemblance to his. I was momentarily stunned. What? No way. 6 years. So in the time I've lost, Xie Shubai had a child? When did he get married? I did the math in my head. This child must have been born while he was studying in Manchester. My brain buzzed, and suddenly I felt like a fool for how I'd been acting these past few days. Xie Shubai put down the chart and bent down to pick up the little girl, his voice incredibly gentle. "Lele, why are you at the hospital?" Where's Aunt Wong? Didn't she come with you? Lele snuggled into Xie Shubai's arms, answering obediently. She missed her daddy, and Annie was bringing something for daddy, so she tagged along. Annie was downstairs putting things away, and Lele ran up first. Hearing her response, Xie Shubai finally relaxed. He held Lele close, smiled, and then turned to me. Lele, this is Aunt Xiaoyin. Say hello to her. I was so embarrassed I wished I could crawl under the covers. Senior brother, why didn't you tell me you had a family? How dare you let me get my hopes up? My face burned as I looked at Lele. I really didn't know how to respond. Was I supposed to say, hello, I'm your daddy's junior sister from university. I had a car accident and lost my memory, and I thought your daddy was single, so I tried to pursue him. I might as well explode on the spot. Lele slipped out of Xie Shubai's arms and quickly ran over to my bedside. Her small, innocent face was full of concern as she gently cupped my hand. Aunt Xiaoyin, you haven't come to play with me in so long. Were you sick? I forced a smile. Yes, I was in a car accident. Wait. Huh? So, I'd met Lele before? What exactly happened during those 6 lost years? Xie Shubai also seemed surprised. You two have met before? Xie Shubai was called away by another patient, leaving me to sit with Lele on the bench in the hospital's lobby. Despite her young age, Lele was mature beyond her years. After hearing about my car accident, she scolded me sternly. Aunt Xiaoyin, how could you be so careless? That was so dangerous. Though she was only 5 or 6, she had a demeanor strikingly similar to Xie Shubai's, rigid and proper. Even though I couldn't remember the details, I couldn't help but apologize to Lele. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I'll be more careful next time. I tried to get some information out of Lele about how we knew each other. At first, she was surprised. You don't remember? Then, after a moment of realization, she nodded knowingly. Oh, I get it. You lost your memory. Lele explained that she wasn't Xie Shubai's biological daughter. She was adopted by him after his older brother passed away. She spoke of the painful past with surprising calm. When they passed away, Grandma was very sad, but Daddy was still studying abroad at the time and couldn't take care of things at home. Lele looked up at me, her eyes sparkling. You, Aunt Xiaoyin, were the one who helped us a lot. You picked me up from school and helped Grandma manage all those complicated things. Hearing this made my heart ache. I couldn't help but stand up and head over to the nearby vending machine to buy her some candy. But just as I turned around, someone bumped into me hard. It was a tall man who was anxiously looking at the unconscious girl in his arms, rushing through the hospital. Excuse me, make way. I almost lost my balance and fell to the ground, but Lele quickly jumped down to support me. She looked up at me with concern. Aunt Xiaoyin, are you okay? Thank you, little knight Lele. I'm fine. I quickly thanked Lele and couldn't help but glance in the direction the man had left. His back looked oddly familiar. I quickly shook my head. I don't know him. It must just be a coincidence. Returning to the bench, I opened the candy wrapper and handed it to Lele. I'm really sorry for forgetting everything that happened. Lele was understanding and shook her head. It's okay because you're sick. She hummed a little tune as she unwrapped the candy, just about to put it in her mouth when suddenly a little boy ran over and slapped the candy out of her hand. He was dressed in fine clothes, and his features were delicate, but the words that came out of his mouth were rude. You can't eat that. It's mine. Lele stood up, frowning. What are you doing? This is the candy Aunt Xiaoyin gave me. The little boy puffed up his cheeks and glared at Lele. You can't eat it. My mom bought this candy, not yours. He was so angry that he even pushed Lele on purpose. Lele stumbled back a few steps, her face turning red. I quickly reached out to support her, squatting down to shield her in my arms. I looked seriously at the little boy and said, Little one, you've made a mistake. I'm not your mom. I'm not particularly fond of children, but Lele's past made me feel both sorry for her and protective. But this rude boy was testing my patience. I unwrapped another piece of candy and held it out to Lele with a gentle smile. This candy belongs to Lele, not you. The boy looked at me in disbelief, his face filled with hurt, as if he was about to cry. Mom? What did you say? This kid is just going around randomly calling people mom? What's wrong with him? I looked at him and repeated myself, little one, you've got the wrong person. I'm not your mom. Upon hearing this, his face turned red with anger. He lunged forward, roughly grabbing at Lele and trying to shove her away. Go away. She's my mom. Go away. His voice broke from the force of his screams, turning into a high-pitched shriek. Lele had had enough. She yelled back, she's not your mom. She's my Aunt Xiaoyin. You're the one who's being unreasonable. Watching this boy's tantrum, I couldn't help but feel a wave of disgust. I grabbed him by the collar and said coldly, young man, your behavior is very rude. I think you're disturbing us. Apologize to Lele right now. Hearing this, he suddenly froze, his eyes welling up with tears. He started to wail loudly, why? You're my mom. His cries echoed through the entire lobby, causing a momentary silence among the crowd. I remained unfazed, holding Lele protectively and glaring coldly at the boy.